The winter wind carried more than snow through Copper Falls that December morning in 1883. It carried the scent of cruelty, that peculiar smell of a crowd gathered not for commerce, but for spectacle. The kind of gathering where decent people found reasons to look away, where neighbors became strangers, where humanity took a holiday and left only appetite behind. Maeve Sullivan stood on the auction platform in the center of town, her wrists bound with rough hemp rope that had already rubbed her skin raw. The wooden stage creaked beneath her weight, and she heard the snickers ripple through the crowd like poison spreading through water. Each breath came shallow and visible in the frozen air, each one a reminder that she was still alive to endure this nightmare they called justice. 24 years old, that was all she was. 24 years of learning to make herself smaller, quieter, less. 24 years of watching her reflection and believing the lie that she was somehow wrong, somehow broken, somehow deserving of exactly this moment. The town square had been decorated for Christmas just days before. Now those same pine boughs and red ribbons framed her humiliation like a sick joke about goodwill toward men. The auctioneer stood beside her, a weasel-faced man named Cornelius Pitch, whose breath reeked of whiskey even at 10 in the morning. His yellow teeth showed when he smiled at the crowd, and Maeve wondered how many other women he had sold in his career, how many lives he had reduced to numbers and terms of service. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pitch announced, his voice carrying that false cheerfulness that made Maeve's stomach turn. "We come now to the matter of the Moore estate debts. Miss Maeve Sullivan, ward of the late Margaret Moore, stands here to settle accounts totaling $500, a sum accumulated through gambling debts and doctor's bills." The crowd stirred like a beast waking from sleep. Maeve kept her eyes fixed on the mountains in the distance, those snow-capped peaks that had always promised escape but never delivered it. She had learned long ago that looking at the crowd only made it worse. Their faces blurred together into a single grotesque mask of judgment and contempt, all of them so eager to watch someone else's dignity stripped away that they forgot their own failings. A woman's voice cut through from the back. "Look at the size of her! Feed Bill alone would bankrupt you." Laughter erupted sharp and cruel as broken glass. Another voice joined in, this one male and slurred with morning alcohol. "Need a wagon just to get her to the altar." More laughter. Always more laughter. Maeve's hands trembled despite the cold, despite her determination not to let them see her break. She thought of her mother dead these past 6 months. Margaret Moore had been a strong woman, a woman of faith and dignity. What would she think seeing her daughter here displayed like livestock sold to pay debts that were not her own? The first stone hit her shoulder, small, barely larger than a pebble thrown by someone too cowardly to show their face. The second one struck her cheek, and Maeve tasted blood. The copper tang mixed with tears she refused to let fall, and she bit down hard on the inside of her lip to keep from crying out. Now, Pitch said, but his tone suggested he found the stone-throwing more amusing than alarming. "Let's maintain some order here. Miss Sullivan is being offered as an indentured servant, not a circus animal. She can cook clean and perform general household duties. The term of service would be 7 years or until the debt is paid in full through labor." 7 years. The words hit harder than any stone. 7 years of being someone's property, someone's burden, someone's joke. Maeve tried to do the math in her head. She would be 31 when the term ended. An old maid by any measure, used up and cast aside with nothing to show for it but calluses and shame. Her Uncle Victor stepped forward then, and Maeve felt her last hope die. Victor Sullivan was a well-dressed man in his late 40s, with the kind of face that suggested prosperity and respectability. The town saw him as a pillar of the community, a successful mine office manager, a man who took in his orphaned niece out of Christian charity. Only Maeve knew the truth behind that mask, the calculation in those eyes, the way his smile never quite reached them. Now let's have some decency," Victor said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "My niece is a good Christian girl, capable of cooking and sewing. Surely someone here can see her value. Value. The word tasted like ash in Maeve's mouth. What was her value? What was anyone's value when reduced to terms of service and years of unpaid labor? The bidding began like a slow execution. Horace Kemp, owner of the dry goods store, offered $50 in a tone that suggested he was doing her a favor. She can scrub floors at my establishment. God knows I need someone who can lift heavy loads. The crowd tittered at the implication. Maeve's cheeks burned, but she kept her face blank, her eyes on those distant mountains. She imagined walking into them, disappearing into the white, letting the cold take her before this town could. Widow Pruitt raised the bid to $75. The old woman ran the boarding house with an iron fist and a reputation for cruelty to her staff. Maeve had worked there briefly after her mother's death, 3 months of 16-hour days for pennies that never seemed to add up to anything. The thought of going back there, of spending 7 years under Pruitt's vindictive eye, made her want to vomit. 80, Kemp countered. 100, Pruitt snapped, and there was satisfaction in her voice. She wanted Maeve not for labor, but for revenge. During those 3 months at the boarding house, Maeve had witnessed things. Theft from guests, watered down soup charged at full-price girls, beaten for minor infractions. She had said nothing at the time, too afraid of losing even that meager position. But Pruitt knew, she had seen, and Pruitt did not forgive. The bidding stalled at $100. The crowd fell quiet, waiting. Pitch raised his gavel, and Maeve understood that this was it. This was the moment her life would end, not with death, but with something worse. 7 years of Widow Pruitt's basement room, 7 years of scrubbing other people's floors, 7 years of being reminded daily that she was fat, useless, unwanted. Victor leaned close to Pitch, whispering something Maeve could not hear, but she saw the auctioneer nod, saw the way Victor's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. She knew that look. It was the same look he had worn when her mother lay dying, the same look he had worn when he moved into their small cabin to provide care, the same look he wore every time he mentioned the debts that kept accumulating. Pitch raised his gavel. $100 going once. Maeve closed her eyes. She thought of her mother's grave unmarked, except for a wooden cross she had carved herself. She thought of her father dead these 10 years, taken by consumption when Maeve was barely 14. She thought of all the prayers she had said as a child, all the time she had asked God why he had made her this way, why her body was wrong, why she could never be the daughter her parents deserved. Going twice. The mountains blurred in her vision, not from tears. Maeve Sullivan would not cry for these people. She would not give them that. Going. $500. The voice cut through the cold air like thunder across a canyon, deep, rough, utterly devoid of negotiation. It was not a bid. It was a statement. Maeve's eyes snapped open. The crowd parted like water before a ship's bow, and through the gap walked a man unlike anyone she had ever seen. He was massive, not fat, but built like the mountains themselves, broad-shouldered and thick-muscled, with a frame that suggested he could pull a plow as easily as a team of oxen. He wore a heavy coat made of bear fur, and beneath it, Maeve could see the worn leather of a working man's gear. His face was weathered and bearded, with a jaw that looked carved from granite, and eyes that held the kind of silence that came from seeing too much and speaking too little. His boots thudded against the frozen ground as he approached the platform, each step deliberate and unhurried. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of his face, but Maeve could see enough to know this was a man who had lived hard and survived harder. The crowd stared in stunned silence. Whispers started like wind through dead leaves. That's McKenna, the mountain hermit, hasn't been to town in 3 years. Heard he killed his wife up there. Heard he went mad from grief. Heard he talks to ghosts. Pitch found his voice first, though it came out strangled. Did you say $500? The man did not answer. He simply reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. The sound of it hitting the platform's edge was heavy, final. Without a word, he opened it and began counting out bills under the rough wood. 50, 100, 150. The crowd watched in disbelief as the pile grew. Maeve watched too, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. 200, 300. Victor's face had gone from pink to white to a mottled red that suggested apoplexy. He stepped forward, one hand raised as if to physically stop what was happening. "Now hold on just a minute," Victor said, and his voice had lost all pretense of sympathy. "Who are you, stranger? I have a right to know who's buying my niece." The mountain man did not even glance at Victor. 400, 450. His hands were large and scarred, the hands of someone who had worked with them every day of his life. The bills he laid down looked crisp, well kept, earned through blood and sweat and years of relentless labor. 475. 500. He placed the last bill on the pile and looked up at Pitch. His eyes were dark brown, the color of rich soil, and they held an intensity that made the auctioneer take a step back. "Debts paid," the man said. His voice was like gravel in a tin cup. "Cut her loose." Victor sputtered, his careful mask finally cracking. "You can't just walk in here and take her. She's my niece. I have family rights. I have—" The mountain man finally looked at Victor, and whatever he saw in that gaze made Victor's words die in his throat. "You put her on this platform," the man said quietly. "You gave up those rights." Pitch scrambled to count the bills, his fingers shaking. The entire town seemed to hold its breath. When the auctioneer finished, he looked up with an expression of mixed relief and disappointment. Relief that the debt was settled. Disappointment that the show was over. "The debt is paid in full," Pitch announced to the crowd. "Miss Sullivan, you are free to go." Free. The word sounded foreign, impossible. Maeve stared at the stranger, searching his face for some sign of what he wanted, what price she would truly have to pay. Nothing in this world was free. Men did not spend $500 without expecting something in return. The mountain man climbed the 3 steps to the platform with the easy grace of someone who had spent his life in rough country. He pulled a knife from his belt, a wicked-looking blade that gleamed in the weak winter sunlight. Maeve flinched backward instinctively. "Easy," he said quietly, the first hint of gentleness in his voice. "Just cutting the ropes." With 2 quick movements, he sliced through the hemp bindings on her wrists. The ropes fell away, and Maeve gasped as blood rushed back into her hands. The skin beneath was red and raw, marked with deep grooves where the rope had bitten in. She had been bound since dawn, nearly 4 hours of circulation slowly cutting off. The man looked at her wrists for a long moment, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Then he turned and addressed the crowd. "Show's over," he said. "Go home." For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse. There were mutters and whispers, sidelong glances and speculation, but they went. Even Widow Pruitt, her face twisted with frustration at losing her prize, turned and stalked away with her skirts swishing angrily. Only Victor remained, his eyes burning with a rage that promised this was not over. He stepped closer to the platform, close enough that Maeve could see the vein pulsing in his temple. "You made an enemy today, stranger," Victor said, his voice low and venomous. "That girl carries more than debt. There are family obligations, blood ties that can't be bought with money." The mountain man turned to face Victor fully, and even though he did not move aggressively, there was something in his posture that made Victor take an involuntary step backward. "The law says the debt's paid," the man replied. "The law says she's free. If you have a complaint, take it to the territorial court, otherwise walk away while you still can." The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Victor's hand twitched toward the gun at his hip, then thought better of it. Whatever else he was, Victor Sullivan was not stupid enough to draw on a man who looked like he had been born with a weapon in his hand. "This isn't finished," Victor spat. Then he turned and stormed off toward the saloon, his footsteps heavy with impotent fury. Silence fell over the platform. Maeve stood there, rubbing her wrist, trying to process what had just happened. One moment she had been about to be sold into servitude, the next a stranger had bought her freedom. But freedom for what? At what cost? The mountain man turned to look at her for the first time. Really look at her. His eyes swept over her, once taking in her worn dress, her wild hair, her trembling hands. There was no judgment in that gaze, no mockery, no disgust, just assessment, like he was looking at a horse to determine if it was sound, not to determine if it was pretty. "You got anywhere to go?" he asked. Maeve's voice caught in her throat. She tried to speak, failed, tried again. No, my father's house was seized to pay part of the debt. I've been sleeping in the church basement." The man nodded once, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "You got any belongings?" "A bag at the boarding house. Mrs. Pruitt let me keep my things there until—" She could not finish the sentence. "Until she was sold. Until someone claimed her." "Get it," the man said. "Meet me at the livery stable in 1 hour. Can you ride?" "Ride I?" "Yes, a little. But I don't understand. You paid my father's debt. Why, what do you want from me?" For the first time, something that might have been emotion flickered across the mountain man's weathered face. It was gone too quickly to identify, but Maeve could have sworn it looked like understanding, like recognition, like he had asked himself the same question once a long time ago about someone else. "What I want," he said slowly, seeming to choose his words carefully, "is for you to get your things and meet me at the livery. The mountain's a hard ride, and we need to leave before the weather turns. Beyond that—" he paused. "Beyond that, we'll figure it out as we go. The mountain, you're taking me up into the mountains. I live there, got a cabin about 20 miles northeast of here, high up where most folks don't bother to go. It's rough country, but it's quiet. And it's a damn sight better than this town." Maeve's mind reeled. Go with this stranger into the mountains, to some isolated cabin miles from anywhere. Every story she had ever heard, every warning about strange men in isolated places screamed at her to refuse. But what was the alternative? Stay in Copper Falls where everyone knew her shame. Wait for Victor to find some other legal loophole to exploit. Sleep in the church basement and hope for charity from people who had just watched her humiliation like it was Saturday night entertainment. The man seemed to read her hesitation. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, and there was something in his voice now, not pleading, not reassuring in the way men usually were when they wanted something, just stating a fact. "I'm not going to force you to do anything you don't want to do, but you're standing here in the middle of winter with nowhere to go, and a whole town full of people who just proved they don't give a damn about you. You can come with me, or you can take your chances here. Your choice." Your choice. Those 2 words carried more weight than $500. They were the first words anyone had said to her in months that treated her like a person capable of making decisions, not a burden to be disposed of. Maeve looked back at the town. The last stragglers were disappearing into shops and homes, already forgetting about her, already moving on to the next bit of gossip. She saw the church steeple where she had slept on hard pews, too afraid to take up space, too ashamed to ask for a blanket. She saw the boarding house where Widow Pruitt would be waiting, vindictive and cruel. She saw the whole miserable truth of her existence laid out before her like a map of hell. Then she looked at the mountains, those distant peaks she had stared at from the auction platform. For years they had represented escape she could never reach. Now a stranger was offering her a way in. 1 hour, Maeve heard herself say. "I'll be there." The man nodded once, then turned and descended the platform steps. He moved with controlled power, every step deliberate, like a man very aware of his own strength and very careful about how he used it. Within moments he disappeared into the dispersing crowd, leaving Maeve alone on the auction platform with her racing heart and her burning questions. She did not waste time. The boarding house was only 2 blocks away, and she needed to get her belongings before Widow Pruitt decided to confiscate them out of spite. Her legs felt shaky as she descended from the platform, partly from cold, partly from shock of what had just transpired. The walk through town felt like walking through a gauntlet. People stopped to stare, whispering behind their hands. Some looked curious. Some looked disappointed that the show had ended so abruptly. A few looked almost sympathetic, though they quickly glanced away when she made eye contact. Martha Henderson, the baker's wife, actually stepped out of her shop as Maeve passed. "Maeve," she said softly, are you all right?" It was the first kind word anyone had spoken to her in weeks, and it nearly broke her. Maeve swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. "I'm fine, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you for asking." Martha's face creased with worry. "That man who bought your debt, do you know him? Is it safe to go with him? Nobody knows anything about him except that he lives like a hermit up in the mountains. He could be a lot of things," Maeve interrupted gently. "But right now he's the only person in this whole town who didn't stand around laughing while I was being sold. That's enough for me." She did not wait for a response. The boarding house loomed ahead, its cheerful yellow paint and white trim, a grotesque mask over the misery that dwelt within its walls. Widow Pruitt was waiting in the foyer, her arms crossed over her bony chest, her mouth pursed in disapproval. "Come for your things, have you?" Pruitt said coldly, "running off with that mountain savage before the day is even half done. Shameful." Maeve met the older woman's gaze steadily. "I'm leaving, Mrs. Pruitt. I just need my bag." "Your bag?" "Yes, about that." Pruitt smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "You still owe me for 2 weeks' room and board. I let you stay here out of Christian charity when you had nowhere else to go, and this is how you repay me, running off with the first man who waves money around." "I didn't owe you anything," Maeve said, fighting to keep her voice level. "I worked every day I stayed here. I more than earned my keep. Your opinion on the matter is irrelevant. The bag stays until the debt is paid." For a moment Maeve considered arguing, but she could see in Pruitt's eyes that the woman was spoiling for a fight, hoping to extract one final pound of flesh before Maeve escaped for good. And Maeve was too tired, too wrung out, too done with this entire town to give her the satisfaction. "Keep it," Maeve said quietly. "There's nothing in there I can't replace." It was a lie. Her mother's wedding ring was in that bag, along with the only photograph of her parents from before the drinking, and the sickness had hollowed them out. But Maeve could see from the gleam in Pruitt's eye that the woman already knew what was in the bag, already planned on keeping anything valuable. Fighting for it would only make things worse. She turned to leave. "You'll be back," Pruitt called after her. "Girls like you always come back, tail between your legs begging for charity. And when you do, don't expect any kindness from me." Maeve did not respond. She walked out of the boarding house and did not look back. The livery stable was at the edge of town, a large, weathered structure that smelled of hay and horse and leather. Maeve arrived with 40 minutes to spare her hands, empty, her heart hollow. She had lost everything: her home, her family, her belongings, her dignity. All she had left was the clothes on her back and a stranger's promise that he would not hurt her. The mountain man was already there, standing beside 2 horses. The larger one was a massive black stallion that suited him perfectly, all power and barely controlled energy. The smaller one was a gentle-looking mare with kind eyes. When he saw Maeve approaching, empty, handed his brow furrowed slightly. "No bag. Mrs. Pruitt decided I owed her money. She kept it." The man's jaw tightened. For a moment, Maeve thought he might march back into town and confront the widow, but instead he just nodded slowly. What was in it? Nothing important, Maeve lied. He looked at her for a long moment with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted them to. Then he reached into one of his saddlebags and pulled out a heavy woolen coat, much too large for her, but lined with what looked like rabbit fur. "Put this on. Gets cold in the mountains, and that dress won't keep you warm past sundown." Maeve took the coat with trembling hands. It was warm and smelled faintly of wood smoke and pine. She wrapped it around herself, and for the first time that day the cold retreated. "Thank you," she whispered. The man helped her onto the mare without comment, his hands impersonal but steady. Once she was seated, he swung himself onto his stallion with the ease of long practice. "It's a 4-hour ride to the cabin," he said. Trail's steep in places, but the mare knows the way. Just trust her. If you need to stop, tell me." Maeve nodded, not trusting her voice. They rode out of Copper Falls as the weak winter sun struggled to break through the clouds. Maeve looked back once at the town that had been her entire world, the town that had laughed at her suffering and sold her dignity for entertainment. She thought of all the people she was leaving behind, all the familiar faces and familiar cruelties. Then she turned her face toward the mountains and did not look back again. The ride was everything the stranger had warned, and more. The trail wound through pine forest so thick the sunlight barely penetrated, then climbed steep switchbacks that made Maeve's legs ache from gripping the saddle. The higher they climbed, the deeper the snow became, until the horses were pushing through drifts that came up to their knees. For the first hour they did not speak. The man rode ahead, breaking trail, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was still following. Maeve focused on staying in the saddle, on breathing the thin mountain air, on not thinking about what she had left behind or what lay ahead. But as they stopped to rest the horses beside a frozen stream, Maeve found her voice. "The town said you killed your wife." The man had been loosening his stallion's girth to let the animal breathe easier. His hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their work. "Town's not entirely wrong," he said without looking at her. Maeve's heart stuttered. "Did you—" A long silence. Then, "No, but I might as well have." She waited somehow, knowing he would continue. The man stared at the frozen stream, his face unreadable. "Her name was Sarah. We married young. She was about your size." He said it matter-of-factly, without judgment. "The town called her too big to be a bride. I didn't care. I loved her." Maeve held her breath, afraid that if she spoke, he would stop. "She died giving birth," he continued, his voice flat, in the way of someone reciting facts to keep emotion at bay. "The baby died too. A boy. I rode through a blizzard trying to get the doctor, but by the time I got back—" He stopped. She was gone. Both of them were gone. "I'm sorry," Maeve said softly. "Don't be sorry." The words came out harsh. "Be alive. That's all." He turned to look at her, then really look at her, and Maeve saw the truth in his eyes, the grief, the guilt, the rage at a world that killed women for the crime of being born in bodies the world deemed wrong. "That's why you saved me," Maeve said, understanding flooding through her. "Because of her." "I saved you because I couldn't save her," he admitted. "When I saw you on that platform, heard them laughing, saw them throwing stones, I saw Sarah. I saw her standing there 6 years ago, when the town whispered behind her back, when they said she was too big, too much, not enough. And I thought—" His voice cracked just slightly. "I thought maybe if I could save you, it would mean something. That her death would mean something." They stood in silence beside the frozen stream, two broken people recognizing each other's pain. "I won't die on you," Maeve finally said. "I promise." The man looked at her, and something that might have been hope flickered in his eyes. "That's not a promise you can make, but I appreciate the thought." He tightened his horse's girth again. "We should keep moving. Storm's coming." As they rode, Maeve processed what she had learned. This stranger had not saved her out of kindness or charity. He had saved her out of grief and guilt, trying to undo a past he could not change. She should have been afraid of that, should have been worried about being a replacement for a dead woman, a way for him to assuage his conscience. But somehow she was not afraid. Because at least his reasons were honest. At least he was not pretending this was about her worth or her value. He saw her as a second chance, and that was more than anyone in Copper Falls had ever seen. The cabin appeared as the sun began to set, nestled against the mountainside like it had grown there. It was larger than Maeve had expected, built from thick logs that looked like they could withstand anything the mountain threw at them. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, suggesting the man had left a fire banked before coming to town. He helped her down from the mare, and Maeve's legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. 4 hours in the saddle after months of minimal activity had left her muscles screaming. "Go inside," he said, already leading the horses toward a small barn nearby. "There's a fire. Get warm. I'll be in once the horses are settled." Maeve stumbled toward the cabin exhausted and disoriented. The door was unlocked. Apparently this high up there was no need for such precautions. She pushed it open and stepped into warmth. The interior was simple but solid. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall with a fire crackling exactly as promised. There was a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and in the corner a bed covered with thick furs. The walls were bare except for a few tools and what looked like a rifle mounted above the fireplace. It was a man's space, sparse and functional, but it was clean and warm and felt safer than anywhere Maeve had been in months. She stood in the middle of the room, uncertain what to do with herself, until the man entered carrying several bundles. "Bedroom's through that door," he said, pointing to a door Maeve had not noticed. "There's a bathing room with a copper tub. Water's already heated in the reservoir by the stove. Clean clothes in the trunk by the bed. They were Sarah's. They should fit." Maeve felt emotion rising in her throat. Such simple kindness, and yet it felt overwhelming. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." He set the bundles down near the fireplace. "Winter here is brutal. You'll earn your keep cooking, cleaning, tending animals. I don't run a charity." "I never asked you to," Maeve replied, finding some spine again. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "Good. Then we understand each other." "Do we?" Maeve challenged. "I don't even know your name." "Jude," he said. "Jude McKenna. Maeve Sullivan. I know." He moved toward the door. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight. Give you privacy to settle in. You don't have to sleep in the barn. It's your cabin." "Yes, I do." He looked at her steadily. "You've been through enough today. You need space. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." He left before she could argue, closing the door quietly behind him. Maeve stood alone in the cabin, processing everything that had happened. This morning she had woken in a church basement, expecting to be sold into servitude. Now she was standing in a mountain cabin wearing a dead woman's coat, promised safety by a grief-stricken widower who saw his late wife every time he looked at her. She should run, should grab one of those horses and flee back down the mountain. But to what? To whom there was nothing for her in Copper Falls except shame and Victor's schemes. Maeve moved to the door Jude had indicated. The bedroom was small but comfortable, with a simple bed and the promised trunk of clothes. Beyond it, through another door, was the bathing room. What she found there made her gasp. The copper tub was already filled with steaming water, heated from some reservoir system Jude must have rigged. There were clean towels stacked on a shelf, soap that smelled like pine and mint, and even candles waiting to be lit. Someone had prepared this before leaving for town. Jude had known he would bring someone back. Maeve approached the tub like it might vanish if she moved too quickly. When had she last had a proper bath? Months, maybe. The boarding house had allowed 1 bath a week in water that had already been used by 3 other girls. She opened the trunk of clothes and found work dresses, warm shawls, practical undergarments. Everything was well made and carefully stored. At the bottom of the trunk she found a letter addressed simply, "To whoever finds this." Her hands trembling, Maeve unfolded the yellowed paper and read, "If you're reading this, I've likely passed. I want you to know that Jude is a good man, the best man. If he's brought you here, it's because he sees in you what he saw in me worth. Don't let the world tell you different. This mountain forgives. So does he. So can you. Sarah McKenna, April 1878. Maeve read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Sarah had written this, knowing she might die, knowing another woman might someday wear her clothes and use her things. And instead of jealousy or bitterness, she had left kindness. Maeve stripped off her filthy clothes, the dress she had worn to the auction, the undergarments that had seen better days. She left them in a pile on the floor and lowered herself into the hot water. The sensation was overwhelming. Heat soaking into her aching muscles, washing away the grime and the blood and the residual fear. She scrubbed herself raw with the soap, washing away every trace of the auction platform, every whispered insult, every mocking laugh. When she finally emerged pink and clean and warmer than she had been in years, she felt almost human again. She dressed in one of Sarah's nightgowns, then wrapped herself in a thick shawl. The bedroom had a small mirror, and Maeve forced herself to look at her reflection. Same body, same face. But something in her eyes had changed. She looked not happy, not even content. But perhaps for the first time in years, she looked like someone who had a choice. She emerged from the bedroom to find Jude had returned, though she had not heard him enter. He was sitting at the table, 2 plates of simple food laid out. When he saw her, he nodded once as if confirming something to himself. "Eat," he said, gesturing to the empty chair. "Then we'll talk." The food was basic but filling. Venison stew with potatoes and carrots, thick bread, strong coffee. Maeve ate mechanically at first, then with increasing hunger as she realized how long it had been since her last real meal. They ate in silence, Jude's eyes on his food giving her space. When both plates were empty, he finally spoke. "I need to tell you something. About your mother's death." Maeve's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. "What about it? You said she died from illness. But I've been in Copper Falls long enough to hear the gossip. The doctor ruled it arsenic poisoning, said it was accidental, rat poison in her food." "Yes?" Maeve's voice came out barely above a whisper. "That's what they said." "Who prepared her food when she was sick?" "Uncle Victor. He moved in to help care for her after she took to her bed." Jude leaned back in his chair, his eyes sharp. "Your uncle didn't auction you off just for $500 in debt. He wanted you under his control." "Why?" Maeve opened her mouth to say she did not know. But then she remembered. Her mother's words on that last day, spoken in delirium but with desperate urgency. "The land is yours, Maeve. Don't let him take it. It's all I can give you." "My mother said something before she died," Maeve said slowly, "about land. She said it was mine and not to let him take it. But we never owned any land. We rented our cabin." "But she did own land," Jude said. "Your mother inherited copper mining rights from her father, 50 acres northeast of town. I checked the county records when I was in town today." Maeve stared at him. "How did you know to check?" "Because men like Victor Sullivan don't go to the trouble of a public auction unless they're trying to gain control of something valuable. And I've seen enough of the world to know that when a woman dies suddenly of poison and her brother immediately takes custody of her daughter, it's usually not coincidence." The room seemed to tilt. Maeve gripped the edge of the table, her mind racing. "You think Victor killed my mother for the land?" "I think it's possible, more than possible. But why auction me if he wanted the land? Why not just kill you too?" Jude finished bluntly. "Too suspicious. 2 deaths in the same family, even a corrupt sheriff would have to investigate. But if he could control you through debt, make you sign over the land rights, it would be legal. Clean." Maeve felt sick. She thought of Victor's false sympathy, his concerned face as he moved into their cabin, his helpful hands preparing soup for her bedridden mother. She thought of how quickly her mother had declined, how the doctor had seemed puzzled by the sudden deterioration. "I need proof," she whispered. "Without proof, he'll just say I'm making it up." "Then we find proof." Jude stood, moving to a shelf where he pulled down an old family Bible. "When I was settling the horses, I found this in your mare's saddlebag. Must have fallen from your pocket." He handed it to her, and Maeve recognized it immediately. Her father's Bible, the one she had thought lost when Victor claimed their cabin. "How did you—" "I convinced Mrs. Pruitt that keeping stolen property was a criminal offense. She was suddenly very cooperative." Maeve opened the Bible with shaking hands. Pressed between the pages of Psalms, she found it. A deed yellow with age granting mining rights to 50 acres to Margaret Moore née Sullivan, and tucked beside it a letter in her father's handwriting. She read aloud, her voice breaking. "Father Donnelly, if you're reading this, I'm dead likely at my brother Victor's hand. I've discovered he's been embezzling from the mining office. When I confronted him, he threatened my family. I'm writing this as insurance. If anything happens to Margaret or Maeve, search our cabin for the deed. It's hidden in Margaret's Bible. Victor wants it. Don't let him win. Thomas Sullivan. March 1877. The letter fluttered from her hands. Her father had known. 6 years before her mother died, he had known Victor was dangerous. And Victor had killed him anyway, made it look like consumption. Then waited, bided his time. And when the moment was right, when the land values soared with new copper mining operations, he had struck again. He killed them both, Maeve said numbly. My father, my mother, for land. Jude's face was grim, and he would have killed you too eventually. Once he had you sign over the rights, you would have been a liability. Maeve looked up at him, understanding flooding through her. That's why you really bought me, not just because of Sarah. You knew. I suspected, Jude admitted. I've seen how men like Victor operate, and I couldn't let him win. They sat in silence, the weight of revelation heavy between them. Outside, the mountain wind howled, and inside, Maeve felt something shift in her chest. Not breaking, but maybe breaking open. All those years of believing she was worthless, that her body was wrong, that she deserved her suffering. And all along she had been worth killing for. Not because she was valuable as a person, but because of what she owned. It was a sick kind of validation, but it was real. What do we do now? She asked. Now, Jude said, you rest. Tomorrow we figure out how to make sure Victor never hurts anyone again. Maeve nodded suddenly, exhausted beyond measure. She rose from the table and moved toward the bedroom, then paused at the door. Jude, yes. Thank you for seeing what no one else did. He looked at her across the dim cabin firelight playing across his weathered features. I didn't see anything they didn't see. I just chose to do something about it. Maeve went to bed that night in a cabin on a mountain wrapped in a dead woman's nightgown, protected by a grieving widower, hunted by a murderous uncle she had once trusted. She should have been terrified, should have lain awake planning escape. But instead, for the first time in months, she slept deeply. Because whatever tomorrow brought tonight, she was warm. Tonight, she was safe. Tonight, she was improbably free. And that was enough. The first light of dawn crept through the cabin windows like a tentative guest uncertain of its welcome. Maeve woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood, a steady rhythm that spoke of years of practice and muscle memory. She lay still for a moment, disoriented by the softness of the bed beneath her, the warmth of Sarah's quilts, the absence of fear that had been her constant companion for so long. Then yesterday came flooding back. The auction, the stones, Jude's $500, the letter that proved her uncle was a murderer. She rose slowly, her body aching from the long ride and the months of inadequate food and sleep. The bedroom was cold despite the fire Jude must have built in the main room before going outside. Maeve dressed quickly in one of Sarah's work dresses, a sturdy brown wool that hung loose in places but would do. Her own reflection in the small mirror startled her. Same face, same body, but something in her eyes had changed overnight. She looked less like prey. The main room was empty but warm, the fire crackling cheerfully. On the table sat a simple breakfast porridge, keeping warm on the stove fresh bread, coffee in a tin pot. A note in rough handwriting read, "Eat. Work starts when you're ready. Jude." Maeve ate, standing up, looking out the window at the world Jude inhabited. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, their branches heavy with snow. Beyond them, mountains rose in every direction, white peaks against a pale sky. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Beautiful and isolated and utterly unforgiving. She found Jude behind the cabin splitting logs with mechanical efficiency. His breath made clouds in the frozen air and despite the cold sweat, darkened his shirt. He had removed his coat, working in just his wool shirt and suspenders, and Maeve could see the power in his shoulders, the controlled violence of each swing. He saw her approach and buried the axe in a stump, reaching for his coat. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I have in months." He nodded, accepting this as simple fact. "Good. You'll need your strength. Winter here doesn't forgive weakness." Over the next weeks, Maeve learned the truth of those words. Jude did not coddle her or make allowances for her size or her gender or her city softness. The mountain required work, and work did not care about excuses. He taught her to split kindling, starting with small pieces until her hands learned the rhythm. The first day left her with blisters that wept clear fluid. Jude wrapped them in clean cloth without comment, then handed her the axe again the next morning. By the end of the first week, the blisters had become calluses. He showed her how to haul water from the spring 2 buckets at a time, balanced on a yoke across her shoulders. The first time, she made it only halfway back before her legs gave out water slopping everywhere. Jude simply helped her up, refilled the buckets, and waited while she tried again, and again, and again, until she made it all the way. He demonstrated the proper way to muck out the small barn where he kept 2 horses, a milk cow, and several chickens. The work was dirty and exhausting and made her back scream, but the animals needed care regardless of how she felt, so she learned to ignore the pain and do what needed doing. February gave way to early March, and something remarkable happened. Maeve stopped noticing how hard the work was. Her body, soft from months of inadequate food and minimal movement, began to change. Muscles appeared in her arms where there had been only flesh. Her breath came easier when climbing hills. The dress that had been tight across her middle began to hang loose. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a day of clearing deadfall, Jude spoke for the first time about what he saw. "You're getting stronger." Maeve looked up from the sock she was darning. "Am I? You carried both water buckets this morning without stopping. First time you did that." She had not even noticed. The accomplishment felt small, but the way Jude said it, like stating an observable fact without judgment or praise, made it feel real. "The dress fits differently," she admitted. "Sarah's dress. It doesn't pull the same way." Jude was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Sarah would have liked you." Would she? She would have liked seeing someone wear her things, make use of them. She hated waste. He paused. "And she would have liked seeing someone fight their way back to strength. That's what you're doing, whether you know it or not." Maeve felt something warm bloom in her chest, something that was not quite hope, but adjacent to it. "I'm not fighting, I'm just surviving." Same thing up here. They fell into silence again, but it was comfortable now. The early days of careful distance had given way to an understanding born of shared work and shared space. Jude was not a man of many words, but the words he spoke carried weight. And Maeve was learning to read his silences, to understand that his reserve was not coldness, but a kind of respect. He did not fill the air with empty conversation because he assumed she, like him, valued quiet. But the quiet shattered one morning in late March when Maeve collapsed in the snow. She had been splitting wood, her newest task, now that her arms had grown strong enough to swing the axe with real force. The work felt good, satisfying, each piece of kindling a small victory. Then her chest seized a pain so sharp and sudden it drove the air from her lungs. The axe fell from nerveless fingers. The world tilted. Snow rushed up to meet her face. When she woke, she was moving. Jude had her cradled against his chest, carrying her toward his horse with long strides that ate the distance. His face was pale beneath his beard, eyes wide with something that looked like terror. "Stay with me," he said, and his voice shook. "Maeve, stay with me." "I'm here," she managed. "What happened?" "Your heart. You collapsed. I'm taking you to the doctor." The ride down the mountain was a blur of pain and fear. Every breath felt like broken glass. Maeve drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of Jude's arms around her, his voice in her ear, telling her to hold on, just hold on. They were almost there. Dr. Amos Webb's office sat in a small valley town 10 miles from Copper Falls. Webb was an old man with kind eyes and steady hands who had seen enough frontier medicine to know when not to ask questions about how a woman ended up half frozen on a mountain. He examined Maeve while Jude paced the hallway like a caged wolf. When Webb finally emerged, his face was serious. "Her heart's enlarged," he told Jude in a low voice that Maeve, lying on the examination table, could still hear. common in cases of severe obesity combined with malnutrition and stress. The good news is she's lost significant weight recently. I can see it in her face, her hands. Whatever she's been doing with you, it's helping. And the bad news, Jude's voice was tight, if she doesn't continue improving, if the heart doesn't strengthen, Webb paused. She'll be dead before she's 30. I'm sorry to be blunt, but that's the truth. Maeve heard Jude's sharp intake of breath, heard the way his fist hit the wall once hard. Then silence. But she is improving, Jude asked finally. Yes, significantly. The physical labor, the clean food, the mountain air. It's all working in her favor. If she keeps on this path, there's real hope, but it has to be consistent, and she cannot go back to the life she was living before. She won't, Jude said, and there was steel in his voice. I'll make sure of it. They rode back to the cabin in twilight, Maeve bundled in blankets on Jude's horse while he led it carefully through the snow. She felt hollow, scraped out, dying. The doctor had said she was dying. At the cabin, Jude carried her inside and settled her in the bedroom, piling furs over her until only her face showed. He brought her soup, made her drink water, checked her pulse with fingers that trembled slightly. I'm going to die, Maeve said into the silence. No, the word came out fierce, almost angry. The doctor said, I know what he said. I also know what I see. You're stronger every day, healthier. You just need to keep fighting. Why? The question burst out of her raw and desperate. Why do you care if I live or die? You don't owe me anything. You barely know me. Jude was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he sat on the edge of the bed, his weight making the frame creak, and looked at her with eyes that held too much pain. Because somewhere in the last 2 months I stopped seeing Sarah when I look at you. I started seeing you, Maeve, and the thought of losing you. He stopped, swallowed hard. I couldn't save Sarah. But you're not Sarah. You're here. You're fighting. And I'm not letting you die. Do you understand me? Why do you care? She whispered again. His hand found hers under the fur's calloused palm against calloused palm. Because you matter. Because watching you get stronger, watching you learn, watching you laugh when my horse sneezes snow on me, it reminds me that life can be more than just surviving grief. You make me remember what it feels like to hope. Maeve felt tears slide down her temples into her hair. I'm scared. I know. So am I. He squeezed her hand gently. But we'll face it together. You're not alone in this. That night Maeve dreamed of Sarah. Not the Sarah from Jude's stories dying in childbirth, but Sarah alive and vibrant standing in the cabin doorway with sunlight behind her. You're doing well, dreamed Sarah said. Better than I did. Don't waste it, Maeve. Don't waste the second chance he's giving you. When Maeve woke, she felt different. Still scared, still aware of the fragility of her own heart, but also determined. If she was going to die, she would die fighting, and if she was going to live, she would live fully. The weeks that followed her collapse were different. Jude watched her more carefully now, made her rest when she pushed too hard, checked her color and her breathing. But he did not stop her from working. If anything, he seemed to understand that the work itself was medicine. One evening, as spring began to hint at its arrival in the melting snow, and longer days, they sat on the cabin porch watching sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. I need to tell you something, Maeve said, about the land, the copper rights my mother left me. What about them? A lawyer came by last week while you were hunting. I didn't mention it because I wasn't sure what to do. Jude turned to look at her, his face unreadable. What did he say? The land is worth more than your father's letter estimated, much more. There's a new smelting operation nearby. Current value is somewhere around $50,000. Jude let out a low whistle. That's a fortune. It is. Maeve twisted her hands together. The lawyer wants to manage it for me. Says I should move to Helena, live in proper society. What did you tell him? I told him I needed time to think. She looked at Jude sideways. What do you think I should do? It's not my decision. I know, but I'm asking your opinion. Jude was quiet for a long time, watching the light fade from the sky. I think you should do what makes you happy. If that's living in Helena with servants and society, then do that. If it's something else, do that instead. What if I don't know what makes me happy? Then you experiment until you find out. Maeve took a deep breath. I was thinking, what if we used the money to build something here? Not just a cabin, but a real place. Somewhere women like me could come. Women the world's given up on. We could offer them work, teach them skills, help them find their strength the way I'm finding mine. She waited for him to laugh to tell her it was impractical or impossible. Instead, he nodded slowly. Sarah wanted to do something like that. She talked about it sometimes in the early days, before he cleared his throat. Before she got pregnant and everything changed. She said every woman deserved a place where she could be more than what the world told her she was. Would you help me, not as charity or obligation, as a partner? Equal partners building something that matters. Jude looked at her, then really looked at her, and Maeve saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not the grief that had shadowed him since they met. Something warmer, something that looked almost like, Maeve Sullivan, he said quietly, are you asking me to build a life with you? Her heart hammered against her ribs. I'm asking if you think we could, if you think maybe there's something here worth building. I think, Jude said carefully, that you're the bravest person I've ever met. I think watching you fight your way back to health has been the most beautiful thing I've seen in 6 years. And I think, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle, I think I would be honored to build something with you. They sat in silence as darkness fell, his hand finding hers between them. It was not quite a declaration of love, but it was a promise, a beginning. The moment shattered 3 days later, when horses approached through the trees. Jude heard them first, his head coming up like a wolf scenting danger. He was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle mounted above the door. Get inside, he told Maeve. Bar the door. Who is it? Don't know, but nobody comes up here unless they want something. Through the window, Maeve watched as 3 riders emerged from the tree line. Her blood turned to ice when she recognized the man in front. Uncle Victor. Jude stepped onto the porch rifle, held loosely, but ready. Maeve, ignoring his order, grabbed Sarah's old rifle from the bedroom and joined him. I told you to stay inside, Jude said, without looking at her. And I'm telling you, I'm done hiding. Her hands shook, but she kept the rifle pointed at the ground. For now. Victor reined in his horse 20 feet from the porch. He looked older than when Maeve had last seen him, thinner, with new lines carved deep around his mouth. The 2 men with him were hired guns, the kind who sold their loyalty to whoever paid best. McKenna, Victor said, his voice carrying false friendliness. I've come to speak with my niece, family business. She's not your family anymore, Jude replied, his tone flat. The law says she's 24 years old and free to make her own choices. You have no claim on her. Victor's smile turned sharp. Is that what she told you? Did she mention the land, the copper rights that belong to the Sullivan family? Belong to my mother, Maeve called out. The deed has her name on it, not yours. Your mother is dead and family property should stay in the family. You killed her, Maeve said, and her voice did not shake. You killed my father too, for that land. I have proof. Victor's face went very still. Proof? What proof could you possibly have? Father's letter, written 6 years before he died. He knew you were embezzling from the mining office. He knew you threatened us. And he wrote it all down for the priest. You're lying. Am I? Maeve felt strength flowing through her, born of anger and truth. Dr. Webb has records of Mother's arsenic poisoning. You were the only one who prepared her food. Father's letter names you specifically, and there's one more thing you don't know about. Victor's eyes narrowed. What? A witness. The words hung in the cold air like a blade waiting to fall. Victor's face went from red to white. What witness? There was no one. Your daughter, Maeve said quietly. Emma was there. She was hiding under the kitchen table the day you put the poison in Mother's soup. She saw everything. The lie came easily born of desperation and intuition. But the moment it left Maeve's mouth, she knew with absolute certainty it was not a lie at all. Emma had been there. Emma had seen. The horror on Victor's face confirmed it. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice shook. "Am I want to bet your neck on it because murder carries a hanging sentence, Uncle. And when Emma testifies, when she tells the court what you did, there won't be enough money in Montana to save you." Victor's hand dropped to his gun. Jude's rifle came up in one smooth motion. "Don't," Jude said quietly. "You draw that weapon and you die right here. You're hired men too. Is that land worth your life?" For a long moment nobody moved. The only sound was wind through pine trees and the nervous stamping of horses. Maeve could see Victor calculating weighing options, trying to find an angle. Then hoofbeats approached from a different direction, and Sheriff Wade emerged from the trees with 3 deputies. "Mr. Sullivan," Wade called out, "I need you to come with me. Got a warrant here for your arrest." Victor wheeled his horse around. "On what charges?" "Murder, embezzlement, fraud. Take your pick." Wade held up an official-looking document. "Judge in Helena issued it this morning based on evidence submitted by Mr. McKenna here." "This is a setup," Victor snarled. "She forged that letter. My daughter would never—" "Your daughter came to my office 2 weeks ago," Wade said carefully. "She wanted to talk. Said she'd been carrying something heavy for 6 years. We took her statement, had her write it all down with a notary present. Based on what she told us, combined with the letter and the deed, the judge issued this warrant. She wanted to talk. Said she'd been carrying something heavy for 6 years. We took her statement, and based on what she told us, combined with the letter and the deed, the judge issued this warrant. Said she's been carrying the guilt for 6 years, too scared to speak up. But when we showed her the letter and explained what was at stake, she told us everything." Maeve felt the world tilt. Emma had already testified. The intuition that had led her to bluff was actually truth. Her 9-year-old cousin had been carrying the weight of witnessing murder for 6 years. Victor looked at Maeve with pure hatred. "You turned my own daughter against me." "No," Maeve said softly. "You did that yourself when you made her watch you kill someone." Wade and his deputies surrounded Victor and his hired guns. There was a moment when Maeve thought Victor might try to fight, might go down in a blaze of violence rather than face justice. But then the fight seemed to drain out of him all at once, leaving only a broken man who had gambled everything and lost. But one of the hired guns, a young man barely out of his teens, saw his chance slipping away. His hand jerked toward the pistol at his hip. The movement was clumsy, desperate, the action of someone who had never actually shot at a person before. "Gun?" one of Wade's deputies shouted. The crack of the pistol split the mountain air before anyone could stop him. The bullet went wild, not aimed at Wade or his men, but spinning off at an angle. It found Jude. The impact spun him sideways, his rifle clattering to the porch. He went down hard, one hand clutching his thigh, where blood was already darkening his trousers and soaking into the snow beneath him. "Jude!" Maeve screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. Wade's deputies were on the shooter in seconds, slamming him face first into the snow and wrenching the gun from his hand. The other hired men threw up their hands suddenly, very eager to demonstrate they were unarmed. Dr. Webb, who had ridden with the sheriff precisely because he anticipated there might be injuries, was already running toward them with his medical bag. "Move aside, Miss Sullivan," Webb said, kneeling in the snow. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, tearing open Jude's pant leg to expose the wound. "How bad?" Jude gritted out through clenched teeth. His face had gone gray beneath his beard. Webb probed the wound, and Jude hissed in pain. "Clean through the meat of your thigh. Missed the bone, missed the artery. You're lucky, Mr. McKenna. Damned lucky. But you'll be off that leg for weeks." "Can you walk?" Wade asked, glancing nervously at the blood pooling in the snow. "I can manage," Jude started, but when he tried to stand, his leg buckled. Maeve caught him, her arms stronger than they had been months ago, strong enough to bear his weight. "No, you can't. Stop being stubborn." Webb was already packing the wound with clean cloth, wrapping it tight. We need to get him inside. Keep the leg elevated. Watch for infection. Miss Sullivan, can you care for him?" Maeve looked at Jude, at this man who had saved her life, who had taught her she was worth more than the world said. Her hands steadied. "Yes," she said firmly, "I can care for him." Between Maeve and one of Wade's deputies, they got Jude into the cabin and onto the bed. Webb gave quick instructions about changing dressings, watching for fever, keeping him still. As they led him away, Victor looked back one last time. "Tell Emma," he started, then stopped. "Tell her I'm sorry." Maeve watched them disappear into the trees. She should have felt triumph, victory. Instead, she felt only a vast weariness and a strange kind of pity. Victor had destroyed his own family, killed 2 people, and terrorized a 3rd, all for money he would never spend. When the sound of hooves faded, Jude lowered his rifle and looked at her. "You took a hell of a risk with that bluff," he said. "It wasn't a bluff. I just knew. Emma had to have seen something. Children that age are always underfoot, always watching." Maeve set down her own rifle with shaking hands. "Is she really safe, Emma?" "Wade has her with a kind family in the valley. She'll be fine. She's 9 years old and she just testified against her own father. She's also free of him now, just like you." Jude stepped close, his hands coming up to frame her face. "It's over, Maeve. He can't hurt you anymore." Maeve leaned into his touch, feeling the last of the fear drain away. "What happens now?" "Now," Jude said, "we live. We build that refuge you talked about. We help other women the way I helped you." "The way we helped each other," Maeve corrected. "The way we helped each other," he agreed. Then, slowly giving her time to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and careful, and somehow fierce all at once. A promise made without words. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying. "I love you," Maeve said, the words coming out rough but real. "I don't know when it happened, but I do." "I know," Jude replied. "I love you too. And this time, I'm not letting grief win. This time, I'm choosing life." They stood together on the porch as sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold, 2 broken people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Not rescue, not salvation, but partnership, understanding, hope. The mountain had been harsh, but it had also been merciful. It had stripped away everything false and left only what was true. And the truth was simple. They were both worth saving, and together they would save others. 3 weeks passed before Jude could walk without wincing. The bullet Victor's hired gun had fired before Sheriff Wade arrived had torn through his thigh-missing bone, but shredding muscle. Dr. Webb came twice to check the wound, each time nodding with satisfaction at how clean it was healing. "She's taking good care of you," Webb told Jude during his second visit, gesturing to where Maeve was heating water for fresh bandages. "Better than most field nurses I've seen." Maeve felt her cheeks warm at the praise. Taking care of Jude had felt natural, necessary. She changed his dressings twice daily, made him stay off the leg when he grew restless, forced him to eat even when pain stole his appetite. It was the first time in her life she had been needed not for labor but for care, and something about that distinction mattered. "She's stubborn," Jude said, but there was warmth in his voice. "Won't let me do anything." "Good. Men make terrible patients, always trying to prove they're tougher than they are." Webb packed his medical bag. "Another 2 weeks and you should be back to normal. Maybe a limp when it rains, but that's getting off lucky." After the doctor left, Maeve helped Jude from the chair to the bed, his arm heavy across her shoulders. 3 weeks ago she would have struggled with his weight. Now her body bore it easily, muscles she had built through months of mountain labor, making her stronger than she had ever been. "I can walk on my own," Jude protested, but he leaned on her anyway. "I know, but you don't have to." He settled onto the bed with a grunt, and Maeve pulled the furs up over him, despite the spring warmth beginning to creep into the mountain air. She had become protective of him in ways that surprised her. This man who had saved her life now needed saving himself, and she found fierce satisfaction in being the one to provide it. "Maeve," he said as she turned to leave, "sit with me a minute." She perched on the edge of the bed, taking his hand. His calluses matched hers, now two sets of working hands that fit together like puzzle pieces. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the refuge. We don't have to decide anything now. You need to focus on healing. I am healing, and thinking gives me something to do besides stare at the ceiling." He squeezed her hand gently. "I think it's a good idea, more than good. I think it's what we're meant to do." Before Maeve could respond, a knock sounded at the cabin door. She opened it to find a well-dressed man in his 50s holding a leather satchel. "Miss Sullivan, I'm Theodore Gaines, attorney from Helena. I've been handling the legal matters regarding your land holdings. May I come in?" Maeve glanced at Jude, who nodded. She let the lawyer inside, offered him coffee, and sat at the table with a nervousness that made her hands shake slightly. Gaines pulled documents from his satchel, spreading them across the rough wood. "The deed has been verified and recorded. The copper mining rights on your 50 acres are currently valued at $53,000. With proper management, that number could grow." Maeve stared at the papers, the numbers swimming before her eyes. $53,000. More money than she could properly comprehend. "What would you like me to do with the property, Miss Sullivan?" Gaines asked. "I can arrange for lease agreements with mining operations, manage the income for you, invest it properly. You could live quite comfortably in Helena. There are several suitable properties I could show you." "I don't want to live in Helena," Maeve said quietly. Gaines blinked. "I see. Well, there are other towns. Denver, perhaps, or even San Francisco if you're feeling adventurous. I want to stay here." The lawyer looked around the rough cabin with barely concealed dismay. "Here, Miss Sullivan, with respect, you're a woman of considerable means now. You could have servants, society, comfort." "I have comfort," Maeve said, her voice growing stronger. "And I have plans for that money. I want to buy the land around this cabin, expand it, build something." "Build what exactly?" Maeve looked at Jude, drawing courage from his steady gaze. "A refuge. For women like me, women who've been told they're worthless, who've been abused or abandoned or sold. I want to give them a place to rebuild, teach them skills, help them find their strength." Gaines was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. "That's the most sensible thing I've heard a client say in 20 years. Most would squander it on dresses and carriages. You want to invest in human capital." "Is that what it's called?" "That's what I'll call it when I draw up the incorporation papers. You'll need a legal structure, bylaws, property boundaries. And you'll need a partner." He looked at Jude. "Mr. McKenna, I assume?" "If he's willing," Maeve said. Jude pushed himself up to sitting, despite the pain it caused. "I'm willing, but not as her employer or manager, as her equal partner. 50-50 ownership." "That's very generous of you, Miss Sullivan," Gaines said. "It's not generous," Maeve corrected. "It's fair. This was his land first. And more than that, he's the one who taught me I could be more than the world told me I was. We build this together or not at all." Gaines made notes in a small book. "Very well. I'll draft partnership papers. You'll both need to sign. And, Miss Sullivan, there's one more matter. Your uncle's trial is scheduled for next month in Helena. The prosecutor will want you to testify." The thought of seeing Victor again, of standing in a courtroom and recounting what he had done, made Maeve's stomach clench. But she thought of Emma, 9 years old, and already carrying the weight of witnessed murder. If that child could be brave enough to testify, so could she. "I'll be there," she said. After Gaines left, Maeve sat quietly at the table processing everything. $53,000, a partnership, a future that was hers to shape. "You didn't have to offer me half," Jude said from the bed. "The money's yours." "The money is just money, what we're building that's ours, both of us." "Maeve Sullivan, are you proposing to me?" The question, echo of one he had asked weeks before, made her smile. "I'm proposing a life, together, building something bigger than either of us alone. Is that something you want?" Jude was quiet long enough that doubt began to creep in. Then he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "Come here." Maeve crossed to the bed and sat beside him. He took both her hands in his thumbs, tracing circles on her palms. "I loved Sarah," he said. "I'll always love her. But she's gone, and I've spent 6 years living like I died with her. Then you came along, and you reminded me what it feels like to be alive." "Jude, let me finish. I'm not good with words, so I need to say this right." He took a breath. "I love you, not because you remind me of Sarah, not because I'm trying to save you or redeem myself. I love you because you're brave and stubborn and kind. Because you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. Because watching you transform yourself has been the greatest privilege of my life." Tears streamed down Maeve's face. "I love you too." "Then yes, I want to build this life with you. I want to marry you properly in a church with witnesses. I want to help women find the strength you found. And I want to spend every day I have left making sure you know you're valued." "When?" Maeve asked. "When what? When do you want to get married?" Jude smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Soon as I can walk down an aisle without falling over. Seems like poor form to need my bride to hold me up during my own wedding." They laughed together, the sound filling the cabin with warmth. 2 weeks later, Jude could walk with only a slight limp. Dr. Webb pronounced him healed enough for normal activity, though he cautioned against anything too strenuous for another month. "What counts as strenuous?" Jude asked. "Use your judgment. If it hurts, stop doing it." The day after Webb's visit, they rode down to the small valley church where Maeve had first met the kind priest who had held her father's letter all those years. Father Donnelly was an old man now, bent with age but sharp of mind. "Miss Sullivan," he greeted her warmly, "or should I say, soon to be Mrs. McKenna. Mr. Gaines informed me you wish to be married here." "If you're willing, Father." "More than willing. I've been praying for you since your mother passed, praying that you'd find peace and purpose. It seems those prayers have been answered." They sat in the small church office discussing arrangements. The wedding would be simple, Donnelly said. Just the two of them, a few witnesses, traditional vows. Nothing fancy, but binding before God and law. "There's one thing I need to ask you, Miss Sullivan," Donnelly said. "Are you entering this marriage freely without coercion?" The question, gentle but necessary, made Maeve sit straighter. "Yes, Father, completely freely. Jude has never forced me to do anything. This is my choice." "And you, Mr. McKenna?" "You're certain this is what you want?" Jude's hand found Maeve's. "More certain than I've been of anything in 6 years." Donnelly nodded, satisfied. "Then we'll publish the banns and hold the ceremony in 3 weeks. That gives time for word to spread for anyone who wishes to attend." As they left the church, Maeve felt lightness in her chest she had not experienced in years. 3 weeks until she became Jude's wife. 3 weeks until this strange, impossible new life became official. But first, there was Victor's trial. Helena was 3 days' ride from the mountain, and Jude insisted on accompanying Maeve despite his healing leg. They arrived the day before the trial was scheduled to begin, taking a room at a modest boarding house near the courthouse. That evening, Sheriff Wade found them in the dining room. "Wanted to prepare you for tomorrow," he said, sitting without invitation. "Victor's lawyer is going to come at you hard, try to make you look like you're lying about the letter, about the poisoning. You need to stay calm, stick to facts." "I can do that," Maeve said, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "There's something else. Emma already gave her deposition 2 weeks ago. The prosecutor will read it in court tomorrow. She won't have to take the stand again. Judge ruled her prior statement sufficient given her age. Thought you should know." The next morning, the prosecutor stood before the court. "Your Honor, I wish to enter into evidence the sworn deposition of Emma Sullivan, age 9, daughter of the defendant." He read aloud from the document, "My name is Emma Sullivan. I am 9 years old. When I was 3 years old, I lived with my father, Victor Sullivan. One day, my Aunt Margaret was very sick. My father told me to be quiet and play under the kitchen table. I saw him come into the kitchen with a bowl of soup. He took a small bottle from his pocket and poured white powder into the soup. Then he stirred it and took it to Aunt Margaret's room. A few days later, Aunt Margaret died. I have had nightmares about this ever since." The courtroom fell silent. Several jurors looked visibly shaken. Morrison, the defense attorney, rose. "Your Honor, this is hearsay. The child is not present for cross-examination." "The deposition was properly recorded with a notary present," the judge replied. "Given the child's age and the traumatic nature of the events, I allowed it under special circumstances. Your objection is overruled." Maeve watched Victor's face as the deposition was read. He sat stone still, staring at the table, refusing to look at the child he had traumatized. When Emma finished and was led out by a kindly woman from Child Services, Maeve caught her eye and smiled. Emma smiled back, small but real. Then it was Maeve's turn. She swore on the Bible to tell the truth and took her seat. The prosecutor led her through the timeline. Her mother's illness, Victor moving in to help, the rapid decline, the doctor's ruling of accidental arsenic poisoning, her father's letter discovered years later. "Miss Sullivan, why do you believe your uncle murdered your mother?" Maeve took a breath. "Because my father wrote a letter 6 years before my mother died, warning that Victor had threatened our family. Because Victor was the only one who prepared my mother's food during her illness. Because Emma saw him put poison in the soup. And because after my mother died, Victor immediately moved to gain control of me and the land I inherited." Morrison's cross-examination was brutal. He implied she had forged the letter, suggested she was a scorned niece, angry about being auctioned, insinuated she was mentally unstable from obesity and isolation. But Maeve had spent months on a mountain learning that she was stronger than the world told her. Morrison's words, sharp as they were, could not cut as deep as the stones thrown at an auction platform or the years of believing she was worthless. "I'm not lying," she said calmly. "I'm not crazy. I'm a woman who watched my uncle murder both my parents and who has the evidence to prove it. The jury can decide who to believe." The trial lasted 3 days. In the end, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict. Guilty on 2 counts of murder. Guilty of embezzlement. Guilty of fraud. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked at Victor with cold eyes. "Mr. Sullivan, you betrayed your family in the worst possible way. You murdered your brother and sister-in-law for financial gain. You traumatized your own daughter by forcing her to carry the burden of what she witnessed. This court sentences you to death by hanging sentence to be carried out in 60 days. Victor's face went gray. As bailiffs led him away, he looked at Maeve one final time. His mouth moved, forming words she could not hear over the courtroom noise, but she read his lips. "I'm sorry." Maeve nodded once, acknowledging but not forgiving. Some things were beyond forgiveness, but she could let go of the hatred. Carrying it would only poison her the way Victor's greed had poisoned him. Outside the courthouse, Emma waited with her guardian, a farmer's wife named Mrs. Chen, who had agreed to foster the girl. "Miss Sullivan," Emma said shyly, "can I talk to you?" They walked to a small park while Mrs. Chen and Jude kept a respectful distance. "I'm sorry," Emma burst out. "I should have told someone years ago if I had, maybe—" "You were 3 years old," Maeve said gently. "What happened is not your fault. Your father made his choices. You were a victim too. Mrs. Chen is nice, but she has 5 other children. I don't think she really wants me." Maeve's heart broke for this girl who had lost everything. Her father to prison and execution. Her innocence to witnessed violence. Her sense of belonging to the knowledge that she was unwanted. "Emma, how would you feel about coming to live with me and Jude? We're building a place on the mountain, a refuge for people who need a fresh start. You could help us. Learn skills. Have a real home." Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? But I'm his daughter. The daughter of the man who killed your parents." "You're a child who deserves a chance at a good life. What your father did doesn't define you unless you let it." Maeve knelt so they were eye level. "I can't promise it will be easy. The mountain is hard, the work is real, but you'll be safe, and you'll be wanted, and you'll have people who see you as more than your father's sins." Emma threw her arms around Maeve's neck and sobbed. Maeve held her, this child who had saved her life by being brave enough to speak truth and made a silent promise. Emma would have the childhood Maeve never had. She would grow up knowing her worth. Mrs. Chen was agreeable to the arrangement, relieved to have one less mouth to feed. The legal papers were drawn up quickly. By the time Maeve and Jude left Helena a week later, Emma rode with them, her few possessions tied in a bundle behind Jude's saddle. The ride back to the mountain took 4 days instead of 3 because they traveled slowly for Emma's sake. The girl had never ridden far, never been outside the valley towns. She stared at the mountains with wide eyes full of wonder and fear. "Is it always this big?" she asked on the second day. "The mountain," Jude said. "Yes, but you get used to it. Starts to feel like home after a while." "Will I have my own room?" "You will," Maeve promised. "We're going to build a bigger place, lots of rooms. You'll have your own space." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I call you Aunt Maeve?" Maeve's throat tightened. "You can call me whatever feels right." "Mama," Emma said softly. Could I maybe call you Mama?" "Not right away, but someday when it feels right." Maeve had to stop her horse because tears blurred her vision too much to see the trail. Jude circled back, concerned. "You all right?" "Yes," Maeve managed. "More than all right." They reached the cabin on a bright spring afternoon when wildflowers were beginning to push through the melting snow. Emma ran from room to room, exclaiming over everything: the copper tub, the view from the bedroom window, the chickens in the barn. "It's like a fairy tale," she said, spinning in circles until she was dizzy. That night the three of them sat on the porch and watched stars emerge in the darkening sky. Emma fell asleep between them, her head on Maeve's lap. Jude carried her inside and tucked her into the bedroom while Maeve prepared a pallet for herself near the fire. "You take the bedroom," Jude said. "I'll sleep out here until we're married," Maeve finished. 2 more weeks. 2 more weeks, Jude agreed. Then everything changes. The wedding took place on the first day of June in the Valley Church. Father Donnelly officiated. Dr. Webb stood as witness. Sheriff Wade attended with his wife. And to Maeve's shock, nearly 30 people from Copper Falls made the journey. They came hesitantly, shame-faced, carrying small gifts and apologies. Widow Pruitt was among them, her sharp face softened by genuine regret. "I was cruel to you," Pruitt said before the ceremony. "Treated you like you were less than human. I have no excuse except my own bitterness. If you can forgive me, I'd like to help with your refuge. I know what it's like to be trapped by circumstance. I could teach the women skills, help them find their strength." Maeve looked at this woman who had tormented her and saw not an enemy, but another wounded soul seeking redemption. "We'd welcome your help, Mrs. Pruitt." Horace Kemp from the dry goods store pressed an envelope into her hand. "Collection from the town, $800, for your refuge. It's not enough to make up for what we did, but it's a start." As Maeve walked down the aisle on Sheriff Wade's arm, since her own father could not be there, she looked at the gathered faces, people who had failed her, people seeking to be better, a community trying to heal. Jude waited at the altar in clean clothes, his hair trimmed, his beard neat. But it was his eyes that held her, dark and warm and full of promises he would keep. Father Donnelly spoke the traditional words. Maeve and Jude added their own vows. "I promise to see you," Jude said. "Not who the world says you should be, but who you are. I promise to build with you, not for you. To stand beside you, never in front of you." "I promise to honor Sarah's memory by living fully," Maeve replied. "I promise to be your partner, your equal, your home. And I promise that our love will be a refuge for us and for everyone who needs one." They exchanged simple gold bands that Jude had commissioned from a jeweler in Helena. When Donnelly pronounced them husband and wife, Jude kissed her with a tenderness that made the small church fade away. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. Emma danced with Sheriff Wade's children. Dr. Webb told stories about frontier medicine. The people of Copper Falls mingled awkwardly but genuinely, trying to learn how to be better. As sunset painted the sky gold, Maeve and Jude slipped away to begin the ride back to their mountain. Emma rode ahead with the Wades, who would bring her home the next day. "Mrs. McKenna," Jude said as they climbed the familiar trail. "How does it feel?" "Right," Maeve said simply. "For the first time in my life, everything feels right." The months that followed were a blur of construction and planning. Using Maeve's inheritance, they hired workers to expand the cabin into a proper house with 6 bedrooms. They built a bunkhouse that could sleep 12 women. They constructed a workshop for teaching carpentry and sewing. They added a schoolroom where Maeve could teach reading and Emma could continue her education. By autumn, the refuge was ready. Word spread through quiet channels. Ministers who helped desperate women. Doctors who treated injuries from abuse. A few sympathetic lawmen who knew when to look the other way. The first woman arrived in September. Clara fleeing a husband who had broken her arm twice. She was terrified, jumping at sudden sounds, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Maeve recognized herself in Clara's fear. She gave the woman space, taught her simple tasks, let her find her rhythm. Slowly, over weeks, Clara began to relax, to laugh, to discover that she could split wood and milk cows and do 100 things she had been told she was too weak for. By winter, 6 women lived at the refuge. By spring of the following year, they had helped 15 women total, with some moving on to jobs in nearby towns, some staying to help with the work. Widow Pruitt came twice a week to teach sewing and bread baking. Dr. Webb visited monthly to check on everyone's health. The people of Copper Falls, eager to prove their change of heart, donated supplies and money. Emma thrived. She learned to read fluently, helped in the garden, taught younger children their letters. One night, a year after coming to the mountain, she climbed into Maeve's lap, while Maeve was reading by the fire. "Mama," Emma said, the word coming easily now, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "When I'm grown, can I work here, at the refuge, helping women like you, help them?" Maeve hugged her tight. "If that's what you want, yes. But you can be anything you choose. A teacher, a doctor, whatever calls to you." "This calls to me," Emma said seriously, "because you taught me that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. I want to teach other people that too." In the spring of 1886, 2 years after the wedding, Maeve stood on the porch of the main house, watching the refuge bustling with life. 12 women currently in residence, Emma teaching 3 young children their ABCs, Jude and 2 of the women repairing the bunkhouse roof, Clara, the first resident, now working as their assistant manager. Maeve's hand rested on her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant with the child Dr. Webb assured her would be born healthy despite her earlier heart concerns. 2 years of mountain living had transformed her body completely. She was strong, healthy, her heart sound. She had lost nearly 80 pounds, but more importantly, she had gained everything that mattered. Jude came to stand beside her, his hand covering hers on her belly. "Kicking again, like he's trying to escape early." "She," Jude corrected. "It's a girl, I know it. And if it's a girl, we name her Sarah. And if it's a boy, Thomas, after my father." They stood together watching their refuge, their family, their life. 2 broken people who had found each other and built something that would outlast them both. That evening, as they sat by the fire with Emma reading aloud and the baby kicking steadily, Maeve thought about the day she had stood on an auction platform, believing her life was over. How wrong she had been. How impossibly beautifully wrong. Her life had not ended that day. It had begun. 5 months later, in October of 1886, Maeve gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Sarah Margaret McKenna, honoring both the woman whose kindness had guided them and the mother whose sacrifice had made it possible. When Emma held her new sister for the first time, tears streaming down her 13-year-old face, she whispered, "I promise to protect you, to make sure you always know you're loved, to be the kind of sister I wish I'd had." Maeve and Jude exchanged glances over the children's heads. This was their legacy, not the refuge buildings or the money or even the women they had helped, though all those mattered. Their legacy was teaching broken people that they could be whole. That worth was not determined by the world's judgment, but by the choices they made. 2 years passed. The refuge grew to house 10 women at a time. Emma, now 15, split her days between helping with the children and studying to become a teacher. Little Sarah toddled everywhere, speaking in full sentences and charming everyone she met. By the time Sarah turned 5 in 1891, the refuge had helped over 150 women. Emma, 18, now ran the daily teaching programs alongside Clara. Sarah was reading at a second-grade level and had declared she wanted to help people like Mama did. 10 years after the refuge opened in 1896, they had helped over 300 women. Emma was 23, a certified teacher who had written a manual on trauma recovery. Sarah, age 10, announced she wanted to be a doctor like Dr. Webb when she grew up. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Sarah asked the question she had asked countless times before. "Tell us the story, Mama, about the auction." "There was a day," she would say, "when I believed the worst lies people told about me. I believed I was too big, too much, not enough. I believed I deserved to be sold like livestock. But then a man I didn't know paid $500 to set me free, not to own me, to free me." "Tell about the mountain," Sarah would urge, leaning against Jude's knee. "The mountain was hard," Maeve continued. "The hardest thing I'd ever done, but it taught me that I was stronger than I knew, that my body, the one I'd been taught to hate, could do incredible things when I trusted it, that I was worth saving. And then you married Papa and lived happily ever after." Sarah would say, though at 10, she was beginning to understand the world was more complicated. "Not happily ever after," Emma would correct gently, now 23 and wise beyond her years. "Happily ever working. There's a difference." "A practice we're getting pretty good at," Jude would say, pulling Maeve close while the girls laughed. And it was true. They had built something real and lasting, a refuge that would continue long after they were gone. A family bound not by blood, but by choice and love. A legacy of proving that the world's cruelest judgments could be overcome by simple, stubborn refusal to accept them as truth. The mountain had been harsh, but it had also been merciful. It had stripped away everything false and revealed what was essential. 2 people who needed saving had saved each other, and in doing so they had saved countless others. That was the bargain the mountain had offered: hardship in exchange for truth, pain in exchange for strength, isolation in exchange for the chance to discover who they really were beneath the world's expectations. And they had accepted that bargain gladly, because in the end it had given them everything that mattered: each other, their children, their purpose, their peace, and that Maeve knew was worth more than all the copper in Montana. It was worth everything.